For a second lesson, words from Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards the city, the guard keeps watch in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to your rest, eating the bread of anxious toil. For he gives sleep to those he loves. Let us bow together for a moment. O God, let fall from us now the cares and concerns, large and small, that have dogged our steps in this week, that we may come quiet and ready and available to refreshment and renewal and life. In the Spirit of Jesus, Amen. It may be of interest to you that this sermon and those on the following 4 Sundays relate to what the 45 confirmands who will be joining us at the 11 o'clock hour will be studying. There are a lot of scary storms out there. The storms come young. Mother drops 2-year-old George in the toddler room this morning. He looks around in abject terror and begins to scream and wail. 6-year-old Sarah cries out in the night's darkness, "Mommy, Mommy," and Mommy pulls herself from sleep to go to her child's side. "Mommy, it was awful. He was coming to get me. I was afraid." Johnny walks off to school on the first day, his first day without Mother beside him, and the street seems strange and foreboding, and the looks of the other children threatening, and inside his stomach begins to churn, and he bites his lip to keep the tears down. Kathy climbs on the stage to take her part in the concert, and she knows her family sits proudly waiting in the dark beyond the footlights, and her hands are quietly shaking as she seats herself. She manages to control the panic until she misses that one note and tries again and again, and the tears begin to flow. He walks into the dorm that first day in college, not knowing a soul. He tries hard not to show it, but inside there's a rock in his stomach as he wonders whether he'll find a friend or not, and whether he'll get on so far away from home. Liz's hand trembles just a tad as she tries to keep the mascara line straight. The dinner's a big deal for George, a chance to impress the partners, but she's always been uncomfortable at such affairs. What if she talks too much or forgets the names? Charles feels his insides tighten as he walks from the train toward the office. The presentation for the new client had gone badly yesterday. What if he had to change jobs? It would be tough at his age. Sarah stares into the night's darkness. It's her first night alone since George left, and she can't sleep. How's she going to manage? The house seems twice the size now. She hears a noise downstairs. Her heart begins to race. Lots of storms laying in wait for us out there, day by day. The growing presence of crime and violence, not only in the city, but encroaching on our safe world. New Yorker said the other day he thought they should change the area code out there from 212 to 911. The problems of health, the cough that won't go away, the friend in real trouble, the sense that you're not quite up to what you once were. I've decided I'm a world-class athlete. I'm in about the same shape the world is in. A woman visits her husband in the hospital. Her husband says, "Dear, when they brought me in here, they thought I was going to die. Now the doctor tells me he can save my life. The operation will cost around $10,000. Whew, I don't know," said the wife. "That's an awful lot of money." My wife told me to leave that one out. The uncertain financial scene, the realization that finally dawns that economists don't know what they're talking about. One woman said, "The next time I see my stockbroker, I'm going to ask him why the heck they call stocks securities." It's no wonder we're scared. We have every right to be. And so today, in the midst of a storm, boat swamping on the Sea of Galilee long ago, call it fear, panic, anxiety, terror, foreboding, stress, dread, call it whatever you will. It's an ever-present part of our lives from cradle to grave. And it's not all bad. Fear can be a warning system that steers us away from obvious dangers and forces us to take precautions. I suppose the absolutely fearless adolescent is a menace both to himself and our neighborhood. Fear of disease drove medical progress. Fear of ignorance prompted people to found schools and colleges. Fear of stunted lives pushed our fathers to heroic efforts sometimes. We were poor at our house, says one man. As a boy, I never knew what it meant to have more than barely enough. I was never free from the fear of what tomorrow might bring, but this fear played a big part in deciding the course of my life. Because I was ashamed and afraid of being ignorant, I read the best books I could borrow. I determined to get the best education I could. The fears which made my youth so unhappy were the driving force that have given me my home and my business and everything I have. But what do you do then with Jesus and his rebuke of his terrorized friends? Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? Isn't he talking about fear before the storms of life? And storms are by definition not something that we can easily eliminate from the scene. They're bigger than we are. They are realities larger than our control. The wise have always recognized that there are dimensions of life like this. Coach Lou Holtz down at Notre Dame says, I have a life contract. That means I can't be fired during the third quarter if we are ahead and moving the ball. There's a newspaper interviewer who was interviewing a wealthy rancher out west and asked him to what he attributed his success. With a twinkle in his eye, the man replied, it's been about 50% good weather and about 50% good luck, and the rest is brains. Friends, the reality is you have no control over the way other people are going to treat you. You have no ultimate control over your health or the health of those you love. You have no absolute control over the economy of the country, or even the course of your own career. You have no ultimate control over your kids and the way they will turn out. You have no real control over any of the real storms of life. You can drop the sails and bail like mad, but storms, by definition, are bigger than you are. And fear in the midst of these storms is not stimulating, it is debilitating. It does not lead to finesse in doing our job, it eats us up. It literally scares us to death. And there's all kinds of medical literature to back that up. Fear before the storms of the life is endemic to life in this kind of world. It's the way life is. Charlie Brown said to Linus, I think I can understand your fear of libraries, Linus. Library fever is similar to other mental disturbances. You fear library rooms because they are strange to you and you feel out of place. All of us have certain areas in which we feel afraid, feel out of place. And Linus responds, oh, in what area do you feel afraid and out of place, Charlie Brown? And Charlie leans up against the wall and sighs in his inimitable way and says, Earth. You see, the fear that an old faith warns us against again and again is the fear that's associated with ordinary everyday life in a world that we finally cannot shape and control. That is why God says to Isaac, fear not, I am with you. That is why God says to Joshua, be strong and of good courage, don't be afraid, for I am with you. That is why Jesus says, fear not, little flock, for I am with you. Why? Because otherwise, apart from that presence, anxiety, fear, in the face of the inexorabilities of life, in the face of those dimensions of reality that we can do little or nothing about, erodes us, warps our minds, diseases our body, destroys our spirits, disturbs our night, drains our lives of peace and joy. I said all this in a sermon probably a dozen years or so ago, a sermon which by mail reached a friend of mine out west, and he wrote a letter in response. Harry Kane, a professor of medieval literature out at the University of Colorado. I'd gotten to know Harry on the golf course up in Michigan, drawn together, I think, probably by the fact that we played about equally bad golf. But in any event, in response to my comment that a certain kind of anxiety really threatens our lives, he wrote a word which I keep nearby and which I read from time to time so that I shall remember. Harry's gone now, but in his last years, I think he learned and lived the words that he wrote to me. This is what he wrote. Setting out to secure life as surely as possible against every threat to it has precisely the value you describe. It often kills us. To illustrate this moral, I offer the following personal exemplum, Gil. I guess that's the way medievalists talk. In 1 week last month, I received 2 strong boosts to my sense of security. A book on which I had spent an awful lot of time in the past 10 years or so finally came off the press. And after a year of negotiation, I arrived at an early retirement arrangement that I had dreamed of for years. In that same week, an almost casual neurological exam for some loss of digital dexterity suddenly became a 2-week stay in the university hospital where every test known to academic medicine established that I have cancer in lung and lymph and brain. Even for an old medievalist like me, Gil, fiat voluntas didn't spring immediately to my mind when the roof fell in. But Gil, if one can take a deep breath, stand back, and try to forget all the old concerns, different shapes and forces begin to emerge. And most importantly, one does see that it is the anxiety, the battle against those demons of status and future and security that finally gets us. And then the problem becomes one of getting in tune with the larger, older view that you describe so well. It's not an easy process, but I'm finding it absorbing and I think very strengthening. For years as a medievalist, I lectured learnedly on Dante and his rich ideas. But now every day I work hard to get deeply and totally into my mind and heart what is now for me his most all-embracing line. In his will is our peace. Which is a picture of Jesus in that boat. While the disciples stare in terror at the angry winds, Jesus is sound asleep in the stern, on a pillow, in the stern of that storm-tossed tub, confident that he is doing the Father's will and the Father will take care. Which is a picture of what trust is all about. Trust is, having done what you can, surrender to the will of God, believing that in one way or another, everything will be okay. So how do you get there? Well, first of all, you have to risk the journey. That is, some people never learn the peace and joy of trust in God because they never leave shore. That is, they paper their life over with all kinds of insurance against every possible danger. You know, it's possible for some years of your life, if you got the brains and the money, to play it so safe that you actually develop the illusion of total security. You can do that for a time, but it leaves you ill-prepared for reality when it does intrude, when the inevitable defeats and diseases and disappointments come. But it is true, some people never learn to trust in God because they never risk anything dangerous enough to warrant trust. As a boy, I was inordinately anxious, as I remember it, both by genes and I suspect the circumstances of my family in the Depression years. I had to deal with very real fears about a lot of things. But I thank a person whose name I can't even remember, but who spotted that in me and said one day, Gil, never run away from your fears, run toward them. And so I've generally tried to do that in life. It may interest you to know that way back then, the thing that terrorized me most was the thought of ever standing in front of people and talking. And insofar as I have become a person of some capacity for trust in my God, I think it began there, in a young man's decision to run toward the things that scared him. First of all, you risk the boat ride. Then you face your fears. Here the disciples have more sense than many of us. They're scared and they know it. They're scared and they show it. But many people never learn the peace of trust because they suppress their anxieties in a lot of ways. In anxiety, in activity. They avoid what is eating them inside by flinging themselves into tying down the gear and grabbing at the ropes. You know, so much of the running and doing of our time has, to me, the smell of distraction. Distraction from the dis-ease eating away inside. Or if we don't drown our fears in activity, we drown them in a narcotic of one sort or the other, in the bottle or in the tube. You see, one way to escape the contingency of life, its fragility, its fleeting hours, you know, is to immerse yourself in some opiate. I read just the other day that many Americans now spend more time in front of the television set than they spend in doing any other single thing. And it can't be because they're seeking information. Facing our fears is painful, as is the final step, placing our fears in the hands of God. Having done all we can, turning our lives over to God. The reason it's difficult is because it feels scary. It feels like loss of control. Turning things over to God means the admission to ourselves, most of all, that there are some things we cannot manage in life. And that can be shattering to self-sufficient, prideful, stubborn human beings like you and me. Jack Eckert, past chairman of the board of a chain of 1,700 retail stores, tells of how he learned. He writes, "It wasn't easy for someone who'd been a fighter all his life to become a submitter, and tougher still to switch from decision-making to surrender. But I finally gave up. God wouldn't let me off the hook, lightning didn't strike, the earth didn't shake, but I did begin to sense a deep underlying peace that I'd never known before, and an old empty place like a dry well within me began to fill up." Or there's a professional who writes of the same struggle. "I've come to realize out of my own experience that sometimes one really has to talk turkey to oneself. A short time ago, I had some decisions to make that were quite simply overwhelming me. When I was confronted with them and had only 3 or 4 days to take care of them, I sat down and had a good talk with myself. I was determined I would not allow the pressure of these decisions to destroy me. I found myself talking with my God about my situation. I had to do some serious wrestling with myself in committing everything to God and His will. But when I did that, I sensed His Spirit working through me, and I experienced a calm and a serenity that was, in fact, peace beyond all understanding. And I received the strength and the wisdom and the patience needed to handle these matters step by step." So daring the journey and facing our fears and turning them over to God does not reduce us to passivity, to fatalism. It becomes, in fact, the freedom to deal calmly and wisely and powerfully with the storm, even as Jesus did. Leo Buscaglia likes to tell of an experience a long time ago which became for him a parable of how he needed to live. Some years ago, friends and I were on vacation in Sicily when we drove into a fishing village on the Tyrrhenian Sea. We were enchanted by the sparkling blue water and the beautiful beach. My companion Marshall and I couldn't wait to go swimming, so we quickly pulled on our trunks and waded in. We began to swim in easy strokes, and soon we were about 100 feet offshore, and suddenly we found ourselves caught in a vicious undertow. As I tried to fight my way out, panic overwhelmed me. The current had me in its grip. I was being carried helplessly out to sea. I thrashed desperately, flailing my arms, choking on salt water. And then, amid a swirl of thoughts and emotions, I seemed to hear my mother's voice from long ago calling me by my Italian name, "Felice, what are you holding on to?" Words that she had said to me solemnly years ago as I mourned the death of a beloved pet. What are you holding on to? She had told me that all life is transient and we can't hold on to anyone forever. And so, struggling frantically in the ocean off the coast of Sicily, I remembered Mama's question, and I let go. If God wanted me now, so be it. And a peace came over me, and I relaxed, and when I stopped kicking, my feet landed on something hard. Astonished, I found myself standing waist deep on a narrow reef. If I hadn't let go, I would have drowned. A boat hurried to me. My friend Marshall, who was a strong swimmer and more intelligent than I, had realized that fighting the current was useless, and he had let the current carry him to a point of land from where he directed my rescue. Needless to say, we celebrated at lunch that afternoon, and we enjoyed a special closeness in the realization that our lives are not in our own hands and we don't have forever. So we must celebrate life to its fullest as God gives it to us, opening our arms to each moment He gives, and treating one another with all the love and compassion we can. And when our time comes, we must let go peacefully without regret. And I guess these are the only things really worth holding on to. So I know the storms are scary, and sometimes the old boat doesn't seem to be in very good shape. But when they come, accident, rejection, ill health, loneliness, failure, financial troubles, whatever they may be, place them in the hands of your God, and you will find on the other shore an inner peace and calm that will enable you to go your way in peace with Him. Amen. We sing not the hymn listed in the bulletin, but 2 verses of hymn number 77. Hymn number 77, 2 verses.